The rain came down in sheets that October night, turning the empty streets of Ridgecrest into rivers of black glass. The clock on the old water tower had just struck midnight when 16-year-old Marcus Thompson pulled his 7-year-old sister closer to his chest and ran. His sneakers were soaked through, his thin jacket offered no protection against the cold, and every shadow seemed to hide a threat. Behind them, somewhere in the darkness, headlights swept through the rain like searching eyes. "Marcus, I'm scared," little Emma whispered, her arms wrapped tightly around his neck. "I know, Em. I know. Just hold on to me, okay? I'm gonna find us somewhere safe." But there was nowhere safe. Not anymore. Not since their mother passed away 8 months ago. Not since the courts placed them in the care of Richard Hartley, the most respected foster parent in the county. Everyone loved Richard Hartley. He served on the town council, organized charity events, and smiled for the cameras at every community gathering. Nobody knew what happened behind the locked doors of his pristine colonial home. Nobody knew about the bruises Marcus hid beneath his long sleeves. Nobody knew about the nights Emma cried herself to sleep while Marcus stood guard outside her door. Tonight, Marcus had made a decision. When he saw Richard reach for Emma, when he saw that look in the man's eyes, something inside Marcus broke. He grabbed his sister, crashed through the back door, and ran into the night with nothing but the clothes on their backs. Now, if you believe that sometimes heroes come from the most unexpected places, take a moment to hit that like button, share this story with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to Biker Stories. Trust me, you're going to want to see how this unfolds. Now, let's continue. Marcus had no plan. He only knew he had to get Emma away. But Ridgecrest was a small town, and Richard Hartley had connections everywhere. The police, the social workers, even the teachers at school. They all thought Richard was a saint. Who would believe 2 runaway foster kids over a man with a trophy case full of community service awards? The headlights appeared again, closer this time, and Marcus ducked into an alley, pressing himself and Emma against the cold brick wall. His heart hammered against his ribs. Emma buried her face in his shoulder, trying not to make a sound. The car rolled past slowly, and Marcus caught a glimpse of Richard's silver SUV, the windshield wipers beating a steady rhythm. Then it was gone, continuing down the main road. But it would be back. Richard wouldn't stop looking. He couldn't afford to let them talk. Marcus emerged from the alley and looked around desperately. That's when he saw it. At the end of a gravel road, partially hidden by overgrown trees, stood a large brick building with motorcycles lined up outside. A faded wooden sign hung above the door, barely visible in the rain. Iron Guardians MC. Marcus had heard stories about the motorcycle club that operated on the edge of town. Everyone had. Parents warned their children to stay away. Shop owners crossed the street when they saw the leather-clad riders approaching. The Iron Guardians were the kind of men that respectable people avoided, but right now, respectable people were the enemy. Marcus made a decision that would change everything. He walked toward the clubhouse, his sister in his arms, and knocked on the heavy wooden door. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the door swung open, flooding the darkness with warm yellow light. A massive man stood in the doorway, easily 6'4", with a gray beard that reached his chest and arms covered in tattoos. He wore a leather vest with patches that Marcus couldn't read, and his eyes were sharp and assessing as they took in the sight of 2 soaked children standing on his doorstep at midnight. "What do we have here?" the man said, his voice a deep rumble like distant thunder. Marcus swallowed hard. His voice came out smaller than he wanted. "Please, sir, they're after us. Can you keep my sister safe? Just for tonight? Please. I don't have anywhere else to go." The big man's expression didn't change. He looked past Marcus into the rain-soaked darkness, then back at the trembling teenagers. Emma peeked out from Marcus's shoulder, her eyes wide with fear. "Who's after you?" "Our foster father, Richard Hartley. He hurts us. And tonight he was going to—" Marcus couldn't finish the sentence. His voice broke. Something shifted in the big man's eyes. Something that looked almost like rage, but it wasn't directed at Marcus. He stepped aside and held the door open. "Get inside, both of you. Now." Marcus didn't hesitate. He carried Emma into the warmth of the clubhouse, and the door closed behind them, shutting out the cold and the rain, and for the moment, the danger. The interior of the Iron Guardian's clubhouse was nothing like Marcus expected. Yes, there was a bar along one wall, and pool tables in the corner, and the air smelled faintly of motor oil and leather. But there was also a fireplace crackling with warm light, comfortable couches arranged in a circle, and photographs on the walls showing smiling families at barbecues and charity rides. A group of about a dozen men turned to look at the newcomers, their conversations falling silent. The big man, who Marcus would later learn was named Victor Stone, called out to the room, "Someone get these kids some dry clothes and something hot to drink, now." The response was immediate. A woman emerged from a back room with towels and blankets. A younger biker with kind eyes handed Marcus a steaming cup of hot chocolate. Another man lifted Emma gently from Marcus's exhausted arms and set her on the couch closest to the fire, wrapping her in a warm quilt. "Easy there, little one," the man said softly. "You're safe here. Nobody's gonna hurt you." Emma looked up at him with wondering eyes. "You're not scary," she said quietly. "Mommy always said don't judge people by how they look." The biker smiled and it transformed his weathered face. "Your mommy sounds like she was a smart woman." Victor sat down across from Marcus and leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "All right, son. Start from the beginning. Tell me everything." And Marcus did. The words poured out of him like the rain that still hammered against the windows. He told Victor about their mother's death from cancer, how the state had separated them initially until Richard Hartley stepped forward and offered to take them both. He described how Richard had seemed so perfect at first, so kind and generous, but how the mask had slipped once the social workers stopped coming around. Marcus showed Victor the scars on his arms, the ones he always kept hidden. He explained how Richard controlled everything, monitored their calls, isolated them from anyone who might help. He described the elaborate system of punishments, the hours locked in the basement, the meals withheld, the constant fear, and he talked about how he had noticed Richard looking at Emma differently lately. When he finished, the clubhouse was silent. Victor's jaw was clenched so tightly that Marcus could see the muscles jumping beneath his beard. The other bikers had gathered closer, their faces grim. "This Richard Hartley," Victor said slowly. "The one on the town council? Organizes the Christmas toy drive every year." Marcus nodded miserably. "Everyone thinks he's a hero. Nobody will believe us." Victor exchanged a long look with the other bikers. "Oh, they'll believe you," he said quietly. "By the time we're done, the whole world will know exactly what kind of monster Richard Hartley really is. Now, I want to pause here and ask you something. What would you do in this situation? You have two scared children, a powerful enemy, and the whole town convinced that the abuser is actually a saint. Would you have the courage to stand up and fight? Let me know in the comments below. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to Biker Stories and hit that notification bell so you don't miss what happens next. Now, let's get back to this story. Victor turned to a lean, sharp-eyed biker named Dean. "Wake up Judge Morrison. Tell him we need an emergency favor, and call Detective Reyes. The one who actually gives a damn about doing her job right. Dean was already moving. On it, Prez. Victor looked at another biker, a giant of a man with gentle eyes named Big Mike. I want eyes on Hartley's house. Don't engage, just observe. I want to know every move that snake makes. Consider it done. Then Victor turned back to Marcus, and his voice softened. Here's what's going to happen, son. Tonight, you and your sister are going to sleep somewhere warm and safe. My wife, Rose, is going to take care of you both. In the morning, we're going to make some calls. We're friends in places you wouldn't expect. By this time tomorrow, Richard Hartley is going to learn what happens when real men find out someone's been hurting children. Marcus felt tears burning in his eyes. But why? Why would you help us? You don't even know us. Victor was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old pain. 20 years ago, I was you. Scared kid with nowhere to turn. Running from someone who was supposed to protect me. The men who founded this club, they took me in. They saved my life. Gave me a family. A purpose. He placed a heavy hand on Marcus's shoulder. This is what we do, son. We protect the ones society throws away. And right now, that's you and your sister. A woman appeared at Victor's side. She had silver-streaked hair and warm eyes, and when she smiled at Marcus, it reminded him so much of his mother that his heart ached. This was Rose, Victor's wife of 30 years. Come on, sweetheart, she said gently. Let's get you two settled in for the night. There's a guest room upstairs with 2 beds, and plenty of warm blankets. Everything else can wait until morning. Emma had already fallen asleep on the couch, exhausted by fear and relief. Big Mike lifted her as carefully as if she were made of glass and carried her toward the stairs. Marcus followed, glancing back at the room full of leather-clad bikers who were already making plans, consulting phones, spreading the word through their network. That night, for the first time in 8 months, Marcus slept without fear. The next morning brought organized chaos to the Iron Guardians clubhouse. Victor's calls had borne fruit. Detective Maria Reyes arrived just after dawn, a sharp-faced woman with no patience for corruption and a reputation for actually listening to victims. Judge Thomas Morrison, a longtime friend of the club who had presided over dozens of their charity event permits, made some calls of his own. But the most important visitor arrived around 9 in the morning. Her name was Dr. Patricia Wells, a child psychologist who had worked with abuse survivors for over 2 decades. Rose brought her upstairs to speak with Marcus and Emma separately, gently and patiently drawing out the details that would be needed for legal proceedings. Meanwhile, in the main room below, a very different kind of investigation was taking place. I did some digging, said a biker named Tech, the club's resident computer expert. He spread printouts across the bar. Hartley's had 6 foster children over the past 10 years. 3 of them aged out of the system and disappeared. One had a complete breakdown and ended up in a psychiatric facility. The other 2, well, the records are sealed, but I've got friends who can look into that. Victor studied the documents, his expression growing darker by the minute. What about official complaints? 3 were filed with Child Protective Services over the years. All 3 were dismissed. The caseworker in charge of each investigation. Tech paused meaningfully. Margaret Hartley, Richard's sister. The room erupted in angry murmurs. Victor raised a hand for silence. What about last night? Anyone see him? Big Mike stepped forward. Oh, he was looking all right. Drove around for 2 hours searching. Finally, went back home around 3 in the morning. Then, first thing this morning, he called the police to report 2 missing foster children. Made himself sound real worried. Big Mike's lip curled in disgust. Real performance. Academy Award stuff. Victor nodded slowly. He's going to try to get ahead of this. Paint himself as the victim. The concerned guardian whose troubled children ran away. He looked around the room. Which means we need to move fast. I want everything documented. Every scar, every testimony, every piece of evidence. By the time we're done, there won't be a single person in this town who doesn't know the truth. The Iron Guardians set to work with military precision. They tracked down 2 of Hartley's former foster children, now adults, who had been too afraid to speak before, but found courage when they learned they weren't alone. They coordinated with Detective Reyes to ensure the investigation followed proper channels, creating an airtight case that no political connection could dismiss. They reached out to a journalist at the state's largest newspaper, a woman named Susan Chen, who had built her career exposing exactly this kind of institutional failure. And through it all, they kept Marcus and Emma safe. The children ate pancakes in Rose's kitchen and played with the club members' dogs in the fenced backyard. For those few days, they were allowed to simply be kids again. Richard Hartley made his move on the 3rd day. He appeared at the clubhouse with 2 police officers, a smug smile on his face, and a court order demanding the return of his foster children. Victor met him at the gate. "Those children are wards of the state under my care," Richard declared, his voice carrying the smooth confidence of a man who had never been challenged. "You are interfering with a legal guardianship. I could have every one of you arrested." Victor looked at him for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was calm. "You know what I love about men like you, Hartley? You've gotten away with so much for so long that you actually believe you're untouchable." Richard's smile flickered. "Is that a threat?" "No, it's an observation." Victor pulled out his phone. "See, while you've been playing the victim for the past 3 days, we've been busy. Detective Reyes has statements from 5 of your former foster children. Dr. Wells has documented evidence of long-term abuse on both Marcus and Emma. And about 20 minutes ago, Susan Chen at the Tribune published an article detailing everything, including your sister's role in covering up complaints." The color drained from Richard's face. Victor continued, "Right about now, Child Protective Services is being flooded with calls. The state attorney's office is preparing charges, and those 2 officers behind you." He nodded toward the policemen, who were now looking at Hartley with very different expressions. "I'm guessing they just got some interesting messages on their radios." One of the officers stepped forward, his hand moving to his handcuffs. "Richard Hartley, you're under arrest for child abuse, endangerment, and conspiracy. You have the right to remain silent." The rest of the words were lost as Richard sputtered and protested, his carefully constructed world crumbling around him. As the officers led him away, Victor watched without satisfaction. There was no joy in this moment, only grim resolution. Marcus stood at the clubhouse window, watching the man who had tormented him being placed in the back of a police car. He felt Emma's small hand slip into his. "Is it really over?" she asked. Marcus squeezed her hand. "Yeah, I think it is." The trial was swift and damning. Richard Hartley was convicted on multiple counts of child abuse and was sentenced to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole. His sister Margaret lost her job and faced separate charges for her role in the cover-up. The case sparked a statewide review of foster care oversight procedures, but for Marcus and Emma, the real story was just beginning. Rose and Victor had filed for emergency foster care status within days of the children's arrival. 6 months later, they officially adopted both of them. Marcus had his own room decorated with motorcycle posters. Emma had a garden where she grew sunflowers as tall as she was. They had Sunday dinners with their new extended family, dozens of uncles and aunts in leather vests who doted on them endlessly. 3 years later, Marcus graduated high school as valedictorian. In his speech, he talked about the night he knocked on a stranger's door in desperation and found a family instead. He talked about how the people society fears most are often the ones with the biggest hearts. He talked about never judging people by their appearance, but by their actions. Victor sat in the front row, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks, Rose clutching his hand. After the ceremony, the entire Iron Guardians MC lined up with their motorcycles to escort Marcus to his graduation party. The roar of their engines echoed through the town of Ridgecrest, a sound that once made people nervous but now made them smile. Because everyone knew the story. Everyone knew what those bikers had done for two lost children on a rainy night. Now, before we end this story, I want to ask you to do something. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that heroes don't always wear capes or badges, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss our next story. Leave a comment telling us about a time when someone unexpected showed you kindness. Your engagement helps us reach more people who need hope. As Marcus stood surrounded by his new family, watching Emma laugh as Big Mike lifted her onto his shoulders, he remembered something his mother used to say. She used to tell him that the world has more good in it than we realize. We just have to know where to look. Sometimes, the good is hiding in plain sight, behind leather vests and loud motorcycles and faces that society has taught us to fear. Sometimes, the real monsters wear suits and ties and win community service awards. And sometimes, the only thing standing between a child and despair is the courage to knock on an unexpected door and ask for help. That night, Marcus had taken a chance on the Iron Guardians, and they had taken a chance on him. In the end, that's what family is. Not blood, not paperwork, but the choice to love and protect someone when the rest of the world has turned away. And that is a lesson worth remembering.